Today is the fifth Sunday of the Easter season. The lectionary text on which I'm focusing, there were two or three others that I'm not focusing on, is the familiar John 15 vine story. Jesus took many of his storytelling metaphors from viniculture, wine production. It says something about the world in which he lived. I find it curious that John devotes 1/3 of his entire gospel to the 24-hour period immediately before Jesus' death. Chapters 13 through 17 describe one of the scenes from that long day and night. And there appears to be nothing like these chapters elsewhere in the New Testament witness. To me, that's one of the best gifts to us from the early church. The four Gospels, each with its own shift and detail. John's telling is slow motion, realistic detail, an intimate memoir of Jesus' most anguished evening. Leonardo da Vinci immortalized this setting in his famous painting, The Last Supper, with the participants all crowded to one side of the table, if you think about it, as if they're posing for the artist. I'm sure they didn't sit that way in the original story. John provides few physical details, only a whirlpool of emotions. It's rather as if Jesus is holding a light to the disciples' faces, and one can almost see the dawning awareness flickering in their eyes. Everything Jesus has been telling them for weeks is slowly settling in. The disciples, in fact, are often rather clueless in many of the gospel stories. I've often wondered why the ancient writers would portray the disciples often in an unfavorable light. But I think it certainly adds authenticity to the stories that they're not presented as heroes by any means. But here, Jesus is direct. He does not tell stories or spin parables. He answers questions. He explains that he will be departing, but that the Spirit of truth, the counselor, will come and live inside them and with them. This seems to be the context for that vine story. There was probably a sense of urgency in that stuffy room. Jesus had only a few short hours to prepare his disciples for the tumult that lay ahead, his dearest friends in the world, and he would soon leave them. What would happen to his little band? Probably beatings, executions. They've staked their lives on Jesus, and without him, they cannot imagine a future. They pictured a restored kingdom. So it seems quite plausible that Jesus would reach for an allegory, a story from nature, to drive home his point. There would have been rows and rows of vineyards covering the hills outside Jerusalem. He and his friends probably walked through them many a time on their way to the city. So he calls up images from the vineyards around them. He speaks of the juicy grapes. They had just been drinking wine together while listening to his symbolic words about the blood of the covenant. In order to bear fruit, Jesus said, one thing is essential. They must maintain a vital connection with the vine. He reminds the 12 that he handpicked them for a particular mission to go and bear fruit. He comes up with one more image, a pile of sticks at the edge of the vineyard. Somehow these branches have lost their connection with the vine, their source of nourishment. Perhaps a local farmer cut them off and threw them into a heap to be burned. They're no longer useful. The disciples clearly do not grasp everything on this dark night. What we do not see in the text of the Gospels is the dialogue Jesus is having with his audience. We do picture them scratching their heads. They're quite possibly haunted by his focus on death in the midst of Passover fever. However, the symbolism of the juicy grapes and the withered branches will stay with them. The vitality of the early church, the fruit of Jesus' hard work, gives proof of that. He's turning everything over to them. It's only after the resurrection, as the book of Acts makes clear, that his friends have fully grasped the meaning of his death, and they begin to proclaim it joyfully to everyone around them. Jesus saying, "I am the vine, the true one," is only one of his great "I am" assertions that are found in the Gospel of John. You've heard the others. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door or the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. The great I am assertions. Prophets in the Hebrew Bible referred to the Israelites as God's vine or God's vineyard. In this text, Jesus is claiming that image for himself. I am the true vine. The vine exists to bear fruit, and the vine cannot be considered apart from its fruit-bearing branches. An apple tree doesn't need a sign to tell you what it is. You can tell by its fruit. A good gardener attends to the usefulness of each branch. We all know that pruning improves branches that are yielding poorly. Of course, it's important not to push the details of an allegory too far. A decent homilist sounds the depths of biblical stories for truths relevant to our time, or fuses two horizons, the biblical text and the contemporary world, or the great so what, as I think of it. When I consider this vine story, I always think of the famous tree called Pando. Pando in Latin means I spread in all directions, I grow. It's a clonal grove of quaking aspens extending over 106 acres on a mountainside in Fish Lake National Forest in southern Utah. There are over 47,000 trunks, different trees, millions of leaves, yet they're connected through one root system. The exact age of the system is difficult to calculate, though individual trees average, say, 130 years old. The root system is some 80,000 years old, making it the oldest living organism in the world. But Pando's long reign is apparently under pressure. The aspen stand has weathered millennia of biological pressure, but overgrazing, human development, and drought are stressing Pando, probably to the point of no return. All these trees share a common root system. It's really quite astonishing. The vine, this vine, has profound meaning like connection, friendship, strength, determination. The Pando vine pumps life to the branches, which produce fruit for the vine. It does not feel like we are standing in a particularly propitious, favorable moment in human history. In our culture, a declining trust in institutions, the serious disenchantment of many who feel left behind, vicious polarization of people. Writer Naomi Klein said already years ago, our global house is on fire. A mounting sense of peril. When Jesus, master of understatement, said in John 16, "In this world you will have trouble," he wasn't kidding. But he said, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." Thinking of the vine, we certainly need root and branch change. We, the naked-looking branches, are not dead through the coldest winter months. We are surely called to affirm life or a light that we ourselves often cannot see. Maybe we wish for a drawing room scene from that Agatha Christie novel where all is revealed, where all is made clear. When I despair for our planet, I try to think of our world as God might see it. Maybe a God's eye view, one could say. The way one might see from a space shuttle, different cities beginning to glow as the lights come on at dusk all over the world. Or I think of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, God reaching out with a powerful right hand, extending his index finger to touch the finger of Adam, the touch that brings Adam to life. Walter Brueggemann, scholar of the Hebrew Bible, now 91 years young, says God is with us in tenacious solidarity, the adjective tenacious being his translation of that Hebrew word, tenacious solidarity. My guess is that you have heard of the rule of threes for survival training in the military. You have about 3 minutes to live without air. You have about 3 hours to live without proper clothing and shelter in freezing cold. You have about 3 days to live without water and about 3 weeks without any kind of food. I always add one. For teenagers, about 3 seconds without your phones. That's a modern update, though. According to science writer extraordinaire Ed Yong in An Immense World, we animals are leaking sacks of chemicals, he says, given all our secretions, excretions, exhalations. We may well be divine, we may well be vessels of mud, leaking sacks of secretions, but we are commissioned to carry the divine treasure. We can celebrate the most extravagant gift given to us frail branches, the gift of grace. The great presence travels with us on our mortal journey, unseen and usually unrecognized, the eternal one who has no beginning and no end. I say often, we kneel at the threshold of that unspeakable mystery beyond telling. May it be so. Amen.